Welcome to my homestead, y'all. I'm your host, Jenny Velicky, also known as the Funky Farm Girl. I'm working to create a home with a little farm, a little faith, a lot of food, and a bit of funky. I'm learning all about growing and preserving our food supply, raising chickens and children, and becoming more self-sufficient while leaning hard on Jesus. And I want to take you along for the ride. So grab yourself a cup of something wonderful and let's visit a while. Funky Farm Girl podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Velicky, also known as the Funky Farm Girl. And this is episode 85, Ready to Grow. I am so happy to be back with you guys. It has been a month of Sundays since I have pressed record and sat down to talk with all of you. And so I'm really glad to be back behind the microphone today. I am in a modified studio today just because of circumstances and things going on with us. But I figured recorded is better than perfect, right? So, what's happening on the homestead? Well, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that we have been hit by the virus that shall be unnamed, right? And it has taken about 10 days to get to the point that I'm starting to feel normal again, and still am dealing with a lot of fatigue and some congestion, but am starting to feel like I'm ready to start doing some of my everyday things. And so that starts with pressing record here and talking to all of you. Is my garden planted? No. Only about half of my garden is planted, and about half of that is cold weather crops that are getting ready to be harvested. We will just see what happens this year with the garden. I'm really having to trust the Lord that what we have is enough, and what we can do from here on out will be okay. And we'll just see where it takes us, right? So this is the time of year that everybody's ready to grow something, right? You're wanting to grow food. You're wanting to grow flowers. You may even want to be growing yourself. Spring is all about growth and new life and fresh starts. And when I wrote this episode, we were pretty early into spring, and now it's a month into it, and we're already starting to look for summer because spring goes so fast. But I want to talk about being ready to grow, both in the garden and as a woman of God, okay? And I feel like that being ready to grow involves 6 different steps. And as you go through those 6 steps, then you'll begin to see some growth. And so I wanted to break down those steps for you today, both in the garden and in your life simultaneously, so that we can get ready to grow together. We've had a long, extended time of hibernating and resting and rejuvenation. And now it's time to put our 6 steps into practice and get ready to grow. So the number one thing we need to do, first step, is to pull the junk, right? In our gardens, we need to get rid of anything that's dead. We need to get rid of weeds that are going to choke out growth. You really just need to go through and do an overhaul, right? You need to go through and pull up the things that aren't going to produce for you, the things that are in the way. And the same thing in our life. Before we can expect growth, we need to pull the junk. We need to pull the things that aren't productive for us anymore, the things that drag us down, the things that we're doing that are just obligatory but don't add any value to our life. What are the things that you're doing that are basically just dead weight? And how can you pull those out and get rid of those? Number 2, we need to amend the soil. And the way we do that is we determine what's lacking and then we get the required nourishment, right? So in your garden, you would need to do a soil test. Usually, if you go to a local farm supply store or things like that, they have the little soil test boxes that you can get, or you can go to your county extension office and get a box. And you scoop some soil from your ground, put it in there. You can also buy a soil test kit. But honestly, if you just look and see what does your soil need, sometimes based on the types of weeds that you have in your soil. For example, if you have dandelions that are producing everywhere in your soil, then that means there's a specific nutrient that it's lacking. And so it's producing dandelions to feed the soil, whatever it is that it's lacking. So do a little Google research on that and see what it is your garden is telling you based on what it's trying to produce on its own, as far as weeds and things like that grow. But figure out what's lacking, whether it's through a soil test, whether you're Googling what's naturally growing there, whether it's just, that you fed it some things that eat a lot of nitrogen and now you need to add nitrogen back in. Figure out what is lacking and get the required nourishment. Go get whatever fertilizer or compost or manure or whatever it is that you need to feed your plants, feed your garden soil, so that it has what it needs to grow. And then in your own life, determine what's lacking. How's your quiet time? How's your Bible reading time? How's your prayer life? How's your rest? Are you fueling your body well? All of those things, if they're not in proper alignment, are going to cause you to have trouble growing. So you need to make amendments. You need to add in nourishment where it's needed, whether it's through exercise, rest, proper fuel, spiritual nourishment through your quiet time and your Bible reading, your prayer life. Evaluate those things and make sure that you're taking in all of the nourishment that you need in order to grow. Because if you're going on fumes, you're not going to be able to even continue for very long, much less to see growth in an area that you're desiring to grow in. So, pull the junk, amend the soil. Number 3, plant the seeds. This is when it's go time. This is when you take all the preparation is done, and you have to jump in. You have to get started. So put the plant starts in the ground. Put the seeds in the ground. And just get started. Take the first step. Maybe in your own life, it's buying a book that you need to read, or enrolling in a course that you need to take, or making that first step of commitment towards something that you want to grow in. Go buy the equipment that you need to be able to do whatever it is. For me, when it was growing and starting a podcast, I bought a microphone and I signed up for a podcast course. And that was my seed that I planted because I needed those to be able to move forward. And so, what is it in your life that you need to do to step forward? Maybe you need to buy a canner. Maybe you need to acquire some sourdough starter or a kombucha SCOBY. Maybe you need to sign up for a cooking class. or a knitting group, whatever it is that you're wanting to grow in, plant that seed, get started, take that first step. So we pull the junk, we amend the soil, we plant the seed, and now we need to water it frequently, especially in the beginning. When you plant seeds or when you start plants, you've got to get the root system going, right? You have to establish roots. And the best way to do that is to continue to water it, to give it what it needs, to baby it. And so you have to give it more attention than you normally would in the beginning. So if you're starting sourdough, you're going to have to feed it every day, twice a day, and you're going to have to take care of it and baby it to get it started, right? Plants in the ground, same thing. You're going to have to water it maybe a couple times a day. You're going to have to go out there and pay attention to it and really make sure that it has what it needs to get a really good start. So maybe it's extra time that you're giving into something that you're growing in. Maybe it's extra effort or attention. But in the beginning, you're going to have to water it frequently. You're going to have to give it what it needs on a regular basis, right? Number 5 is fertilize. So everybody knows that if you have seeds and you start them in potting soil or seed starter mix, eventually they get to the point where the plants start to look a little weird. They look like they're going to start to fail, and that's because that seed starting mix only has what's needed to get it started. It doesn't sustain the growth, right? Then you need to put it in potting soil. You need to put it in garden soil. It needs to be nourished, and it needs to have the fertilizer and the things that it needs to continue to grow. So that seed starting mix has just enough to get it started, but then you need that boost to get it to continue growing and to thrive, right? And so this is the time you fertilize. This is when you want to boost, to encourage continued growth. So put in the extra time, give it that little extra bit of effort and love. Get the extra little ingredient that you need to make it really thrive. And that applies in the things you're learning as well as the things that you're trying to grow. So if you're trying to start with sourdough starter, fertilizing step would be to start to bake things with it. And then you get a handle on the dough and you touch it and you're actively doing it and you're starting to understand how it works. You start discarding some and adding more feedings so that you understand what it's supposed to look like, how it's supposed to react, and how it's supposed to bake. And that is your fertilizer. Number 6, after we have pulled the junk, amended the soil, planted the seed, watered it frequently, fertilized it, now it's time to reap the harvest. Okay? At the end of the day, you get to reap reward. There's always going to be some type of harvest. It may be that what you harvest is new knowledge. Maybe the actual crop itself fails, but you learn that you don't plant this type of plant in this type of soil. Or maybe it's that you have the itty bitty tiniest carrots you have ever seen in your life. But you learn from that this type of soil grows poor carrots, or this type of sowing seed doesn't work. Maybe you learn that you need to grow it in ground instead of in a container. Maybe you learn that you didn't water at the proper time, or that you need to use a different type of fertilizer. There's always something to reap, even if the harvest is not what you expected it to be. So, if you planted carrot seeds and your goal was to grow big, fat, healthy carrots, but what you got was little bitty skinny things, you still reaped a harvest. It may not look the same, but there are lessons there to be learned, and there are things that help you grow, even if it's not in the direction that you anticipated. So, taking it back to our example with sourdough, reaping the harvest is eating the things that you're baking. Um, it may not be the best loaf of bread you've ever had at first, but a loaf of bread is still a loaf of bread that you didn't have before, that has all those wonderful sourdough microbes in it. Um, it could be that you're producing podcast episodes, or you have a garden and it produces a few things, but maybe not as big as you was hoping for. It may be that you're canning and you've learned how to can something, and now you have that canning product, whether it's pickles or jam or vegetables that now you can make into a meal. Whatever you desire to grow, whether it's a garden or a new skill or a new habit, these 6 steps are going to help ensure success so that you're ready to grow. I know this is a really short episode this week. I hope you guys will bear with me as I'm jumping back in after a month-long sabbatical that was not planned. I'm really glad to be recording again. I am working on a series called Homestead Hospitality that I hope to be able to bring you starting next week. There are at least 3 episodes with that, so be sure to look for that coming soon. As always, you can find me on Instagram, more there than anywhere else, especially in my stories. I hope to see you there. I hope we can connect soon. Come on Instagram today and let me know how you are getting ready to grow. What are you growing in your garden and in your life? I want to hear from you.
Thanks for stopping by, y'all. If you're inspired by what you've heard today, the best compliment you can give me is to share the Funky Farm Girl with your friends. You can stay connected by following the Funky Farm Girl on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until we meet again next week, remember to bloom where you're planted.